Lord Jesus, thank you so much for this time, for the privilege of focusing on your word and your character and your nature.
Yes,
And
Daddy.
just pray that your word would speak to us today. And I would come before you and ask you to be the teacher. You want your spirit to teach, you want your spirit to heal or convict as you see fit. So we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. We're
Amen.
continuing on in the book of Ezra. And just a little bit of a recap. Ezra was written by Ezra, but these first 6 chapters occur probably 100 years before Ezra is even around. He's writing history here. You see some evidence of that as we go through, because sometimes he'll toss in things that actually happened a lot later. But Ezra is about the faithful remnant, the small percentage of people that actually came back to Israel when King Cyrus announced that anyone who wanted to go back home could go back home. King Cyrus sent decrees and money and materials back with them. And the mission was to rebuild the temple. And it was King Cyrus, he acted like it was his idea. We know it was God's idea. And so in the first 3 chapters, we have covered a couple years, and they have got the foundation built. The foundation is built. Hey, Karen. Foundation is built, and I did, because Karen just joined us. No. So the foundation is built. They had a huge celebration. They acted like the temple was already built. They were so excited. The foundation is there. And in the middle of all that excitement, so she says she can't hear. But everything's fine on this end. So she's fully joined. Yeah. If you click on your audio options there, one might say with the device, or you can phone in. So this is an exciting thing. They're building the temple, they get ready to go. And of course, when you're in the middle of doing something that God has asked you to do, and if you don't get any pushback or people trying to stop you, you're probably not really doing it right. So we have chapter 4. In chapter 4, it says, now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, this means it's the people that didn't like the fact that we had Jews returning back to their land. Judah and Benjamin are mentioned most because those were the 2 primary tribes that were left when Judah was destroyed. We'll see later that all 12 tribes are represented in the group. The myth of the 10 lost tribes is exactly a myth. The adversaries here are basically Samaritans. The term Samaritan here pretty much means the descendants of some of the really poor or the weak, or there's some Jews that got left behind. For 70 years, let's face it, the Babylonians couldn't round up all the Jews and take them into captivity. They just captured most of them, left a few to fend for themselves. And of course, this empty land was suddenly filled up with people that liked to take up the space. You had people from Assyria, people from other countries that started moving in. And in that 70 years, you had mixtures. So you had half Jews and half everything else. And they eventually, became known as Samaritans. And that was at the time of Christ. The Samaritans were they were considered religious half-breeds. They were not liked well. The Jews despised them. The Samaritans claimed to worship God, but they also considered Yahweh one, probably the top God among several others, tried to mix and match. And so what's happening here is that these people have had this land for 2 decades, and they're acting like it's their own. All of a sudden, King Cyrus says, go back and rebuild your temple. And the temple is the main focus. They're going to start repairing a little bit of the city as well. And we'll see that mixed in here. So these people, adversaries, they came, they heard the children of the captivity. The children of the captivity are the people that were captives. They're not captives anymore. They're back in Israel. They're building the temple of the Lord God of Israel. And then they came to Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is the governor. King Cyrus appointed him as governor of Jerusalem region. And it's his job to oversee the temple. Zerubbabel actually is a legal descendant of David. If it weren't for Persia, he would be king right now. But Persia is controlling them, and they're not allowed to have a king. And they said to Zerubbabel, the chief of the fathers, and said to them, let us build with you. He said, let's help you build. He says, we seek your God, just like you do. And we sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. So they said, oh, you're building a temple to God. We want to help. We want to help out your temple. We want to build it. And we worship the same God you do. So it was no problem, right? But Zerubbabel and Jeshua, who is called Joshua and Haggai and Zechariah, and the rest of them said to them, you have nothing to do with us to build a house to our God. We ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. They said, you have nothing to do with us. Is this rude? Is this mean? No, they realized that they couldn't co-labor with someone that didn't believe in God the same way they did. And that's important for all of us. We work with non-Christians, we work with other people, but if all of a sudden some Mormons came to us and said, let's go ahead and go out and evangelize together, say, well, we're not spreading the same message, and quite frankly, we're not talking about the same God. And the term there is called co-belligerent, when you are working with people that you don't agree with. Now, could we work with Mormons for a food drive? A Thanksgiving event? Sure, but you have to be careful there. They wisely said no. The important thing about this remnant that's come back is they are totally devoted to God. They want everything right. They're checking the Bible all the time. They're making sure that measurements are right and everything. So as a result of this, the people who had no intention of helping with the temple, that's the important part here. They wanted to infiltrate. They wanted to come in. There's so few Jews here and so much everything else, that danger of the Jews being kind of engulfed by the surrounding people becomes a real thing again. This was a problem in Canaan when you had Isaac and Jacob and those people before they went to Egypt. All the Canaanites around. Well, it's kind of a similar thing here. So now the people of the land, as a result, that didn't work. So now they weakened their hands. The word weaken means to just completely discourage them, do whatever they can to discourage them. And they troubled them in the building, did everything they could to upset the building program. And they hired counselors against them. Counselors is a strange thing because it could mean, and it does mean, hired people to give them bad advice. Hired people to come in and say, you know what, I don't think that's going to work. No, oh, you're digging a hole there. No, I think experts say you should dig over here. That beam will not hold the way you think it's holding. All these experts. But the other thing is, they are under the protectorate of Cyrus, and there's actually a fairly sophisticated legal system in place here. So a lot of ways they're trying to stop them, sending, cease and desist orders, getting lawyers to come in, do inspections. You can just imagine, what's the team that comes into factories and make sure that they say that, what is it? Unions inspect to come in and they say, this is not safe anymore. Well, OSHA, yeah. Coming in and just doing everything they can to disrupt it, okay? And these counsel came against them and frustrated the purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, throughout the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So Darius is a king. The main king that comes after is there's one other little guy in the middle there. And so what happens here in the narrative is Ezra jumps ahead, about a generation or so. talking about Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes, other kings that came later in Persia. And these future kings were involved with people trying to upset the Jews because they wanted to rebuild the wall as well. You have the Jerusalem and the wall. It's easy to get confused between the two because there's there's obstacles to both of these. So what happens is basically from verse 5 till verse 23 is a little parentheses that Ezra is saying. He's kind of saying, just like it was later on that he was alive and he knows about these stories when the troublemakers tried to stop the wall building. So we'll go through it. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote letters to him, accusations against the inhabitants of Judah. So the troublemakers write these letters. It's a letter writing campaign. It's a media campaign. And later on, there's Artaxerxes, same sort of things happen. Bishlam, Mithridates, Tabeel, and the rest of their companions under Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the writing and letter was written in the Syrian tongue. So much later on, there was this letter written to Artaxerxes. And these two people wrote the letter. Rehum, the chancellor, and Shimshai, the scribe, were against Jerusalem, Artaxerxes, the king of this sort. So what's happening? The people that are writing the letters have some sort of legitimate power elsewhere in the region, and they're writing to the Persian king. Persian king, in this case, Artaxerxes, and they're saying, these people are getting ready to build the wall, and we don't like it. We don't want them to build the wall. And we have different types of categories of people here. They're saying all of us are agreed. Rehum the chancellor and Shimshai the scribe and the companions, the Dianites, the Aphrashathites, the Tarbalites, the Aphrasites, Archavites, Babylonians, Sushkanites, Nihavites, and Elamites. Just little ethnic groups in the region. Yeah. And parasites. Yeah. And the rest of the nations whom the great noble Ashnefer had brought over. So there's some of these are people that were brought in by the earlier Assyrians. And again, these are all mixing and matching and set in the city of Samaria. And the rest that are on this side of the river at the time. So we're going to see this side of the river is Jordan. So some of these are from the other side of the river. But what they're telling the king, they're saying, remember that region that's on the other side of Jordan River? That's the reason we're concerned about. So this is the copy of the letter. So this is indication of how sophisticated the legal system was, the records departments were, and the fact that Ezra got a copy of put it in the Bible. He did his research. He's like a reporter, and he's going and digging up the old documents and saying, here's the letter that they sent. It says, this is the copy of the letter they sent. Your servants, the men on this side of the river, and at such a time be it known to the king that the Jews which came up from you to us are come to Jerusalem, building the rebellious and bad city. And they're setting up the walls thereof and joining the foundations. He said, you sent these Jews to us, but you might not realize what they're doing. They're setting up, they're rebuilding the walls, building the city. They're using big, heavy stones. They might be building a fortress. They might be become a military problem. Be it now known under the king that if this city is built and the walls are set up again, they will not pay toll and tribute and custom. He says, these people, they're just pig-headed. They're not going to do what they're supposed to do. You sent them here and you said you offered to kind of help them a little bit, but they're setting up their kingdom again. And when they get this, once this city's built, they're going to start thinking that they're too important. They're not going to send you your tribute anymore. They're not going to send you their taxes. They're not going to send you all the customs. And as a result, it's going to damage your revenue, king. So what is interesting though, what they're saying is they hate the Jews. They don't want the Jews building there. They want to stop the building, but this is a very clever letter. They're saying, you know what, king, that's going to damage your money income. And so you better pay attention to us because you don't want to hurt your revenue. Now, because we have maintenance from the king's palace, it was not meet for us to see the king's dishonor. You know, you've asked us to take care of our little regions. We're supposed to maintain, and we would hurt. We would hate to see you become embarrassed because of what these people are doing. Everything's about your honor, O great king. Therefore, we have sent and certified the king. This is a certified letter. This is a legitimate document. So, certify in this case means here's our proof. Here is our proof. Great, wonderful Artaxerxes. A search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers. You need to go back and look back through Ezra and Darius and all the records of King Cyrus and check out, and you'll see that what I'm saying is true. What we're saying is true. So shall you find in the book of the records, and you'll find that the city is a rebellious city. It's a rebellious city. It's hurtful unto kings and provinces. You go back in the records of the Babylonians. You'll see that Nebuchadnezzar tried to work with these people, and they kept lying to him. They kept undermining him. He had to go back twice. And a third time, he finally was forced to crush them and destroy the city completely because they just couldn't be trusted. They didn't know when they were conquered. They just kept rebellion. And so just check out the records, King, and you'll see we're right. They have moved sedition within the same of old time. Whenever someone else is over them, they just can't be trusted. They're seditious. They'll undermine. And of course, it's true. That was the reason Nebuchadnezzar had to come back a second and third time because the kings he put in charge kept making these secret deals with Egypt. And eventually Nebuchadnezzar had enough of that. And if you recall, Jeremiah, throughout all his prophecies, he's saying when Nebuchadnezzar comes, that's God's man, that's the punishment. Take your punishment like a man, suck it up, behave, honor Nebuchadnezzar, and you can make it through, okay? And they refuse to do that. So, as a result, for this cause, at the end of verse 15, the city was destroyed. That's why the city had to be destroyed in the first place. So we certify again to the king. We're informing the king that if this city is built again and the walls are set up again, by this means you should have no portion on this side of the river. Once this city is built, they're going to start acting like they're their own country again. They're going to stop paying their tribute. They're going to withdraw from the Persian kingdom, and they're going to be in a major embarrassment and a thorn in your side. So you need to put a stop to this as soon as possible. So the king gets the letter in verse 17. The king then sent an answer unto Rahum, the chancellor, and to Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of the companions that dwell in Samaria and to the rest beyond the river, peace, and at such a time. So eventually they got the letter back. And the king sent this letter back. It says, the letter which you sent unto us has been plainly read before me. So I've read the letter carefully, and I commanded, and a search was made, and it is found that this city of old time has made insurrection against kings. That rebellion and sedition have been made therein. We did a search, we went back. We looked at all through records of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, and we found out that, yeah, these people are troublemakers. And that rebellion and sedition have been made therein. There have been mighty kings all over Jerusalem, which have ruled over all countries beyond the river, toll, tribute, and custom. So they went back in the history, they found out that, before Nebuchadnezzar, in the time between Solomon and the early days of the southern kingdom, matter of fact, up to the end of the last days of the northern kingdom, very prosperous. If you recall, even in Amos, talking to the northern kingdom, he says, it's going to be about 20 years and you're going to be toast. But at the time he was talking to them, they're prosperous, they're wealthy, the economy is good, and they had total control of all the surrounding small nations. They were there. The way you guaranteed peace in your country is you made sure that you had control of the surrounding nation as a buffer. So that's why Amos's message was so mocked, is because we're totally secure. Nothing can take us over. And so, Artaxerxes goes back and says, wow, you're right. They were a pretty powerful force if you go back far enough in history. He said, and they themselves demanded tribute from their neighbors. I mean, it's one thing to be a powerful country, another thing to be powerful enough to demand tribute from the other surrounding countries. And so, verse 21, give you now the commandment to cause these men to cease and desist, and the city to not be built until another commandment shall be given from me. So remember, we're jumping ahead into the future and talking about some of the fighting that was surrounding building the wall. We'll see some of this later on in Nehemiah. But what happens here is Ed is trying to point out the type of things that was happening even back here in the time of Zerubbabel. And so there's an order, command, stop building. Until you hear something else from me. Take heed now that you fail not to do this. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the kings? He's saying, make sure you do exactly what you said. The reason I listened to you is because you said if this keeps building, it'll hurt me, hurt the kings. We are the kings. The one before us and the ones coming after me. They consider themselves like a dynasty there. So, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rahum and Shimshai the scribe and the companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem under the Jews and made them cease by force and power. Okay, king just wrote, that's it. It's done. So that's from this story, a future example here. But what Ezra is trying to say is that you go back to the original building of the temple, we're talking about just a couple years after they came back, and way back to the time that we started the book of Ezra. These other people now go back. It was the adversaries of Judah at the beginning, the Samaritans. Verse 24 resumes that story and says they stopped working in the temple. They stopped working. There was enough pressure, there was enough activity, adversaries going on. They stopped work. Now, in the book of Haggai, Haggai shows up about 16 years after that happened. So they stopped work for about 16 years. He shows up and he says, why'd you stop? And they said, well, things were really rough. It's been, and by that time, they had a lot of other reasons too. They said, crops aren't growing very good. There's lots of pressure from the outside people to harass us. And they told Haggai, we decided that it wasn't the right time after all. Said, apparently God doesn't want us to do it now. Let's do this later. And one of the rationales was that Jeremiah had promised 70 years between the beginning of the captivity and the time they return home. The problem was there's actually two 70-year windows. Nebuchadnezzar's first siege of Jerusalem started a 70-year prophecy that begins with it's called the subjugation of the nations. Israel at that point is no longer her own country. 70 years later, King Cyrus says, go back to your own country. That's a 70-year window. However, Nebuchadnezzar's third siege and total destruction of Jerusalem and destruction of the temple is about 18, 19 years later. And that's the dissolution of Jerusalem. The dissolution of Jerusalem starts a separate 70-year window, and 70 years later is when we'll see is when the temple actually is finished. But what happens is the people are excited about starting the temple. All these bad things happen, and they go, maybe we counted the wrong 70. Maybe we should wait till the next thing. A few years before that is when Haggai shows up and says, no, why'd you stop? And they said, things are so bad, we took it as a sign that God didn't want us to do it. Haggai says, no, things are bad because you're not building the temple. The second they build the temple, the day that they resume building the temple is the day that Zechariah gets his 8 visions that night. And that day is when the temple starts. And in fact, about 4 years, and they finally finished the temple. And we'll see that at the end of tonight. And all of a sudden, there's that next 70-year window. So a slight aside here, and that is God considered the fact that the Jews did not come back in full as a sign of rebellion. It was no different than when they wouldn't go into the promised land in the first place. 3% show up, the rest didn't. And God says, well, the rest of your judgment's still on you. And that's where you get the 430 years from Ezekiel. 430 years is a judgment. They served 70 of that. You have 360 left. And 360 years was the rest of the judgment for people that stayed. And they didn't come back after that. So according to Leviticus, the judgment has to be multiplied times 7. So if you crunch all the numbers and multiply times 7, you get, 2,000 some years. And you can turn that into days. I'm not going to do the math here, but it turns out that at the end of that, if you start from the subjugation of the nations, which is the time Israel was not a nation at all, 70 years, God honors it, but they're still not their own nation, right? You go ahead, the next 360, multiply it out. You do all the math, and turns out that when you just line up all those days, add them up, it takes you straight to the spring of 1948. So in 1948, Israel becomes a nation again, right on schedule, 7 times the punishment that they could have been their own nation, but they weren't. But what's interesting is you push ahead about 19 years later, and you do the very same thing, starting with King Nebuchadnezzar's siege and destruction of Jerusalem. All of a sudden, you do the very same math, and you end up with 1969, when Jerusalem falls into Jewish hands for the first time in the 6-Day War. So, just a coincidence, I know, but these things line up. So what happens here, verse 24, they stop working on the temple, and verse 5, the prophets, Haggai the prophet, and Zechariah the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews that were in Judah. And so they came and encouraged them in their own different ways. We have 4 very short messages from the prophet Haggai in 2 chapters. He preaches in the year 520. He preaches in the month of September, October, and December. In the month of November, Zechariah comes and preaches. And he gives them, and they work together. Haggai says, get your act together, build the temple, knock it off. And they go, okay, and they do it. And then Zechariah gives them the spiritual picture. He works on the reason why they're doing it. And Zechariah's vision, of course, answers the question of, or the concern that this temple isn't anything compared to Solomon's temple. Zechariah says, you build this temple, you get it up and going, you follow God, and don't feel bad about the small beginnings, because you do this temple, and God's going to build a temple that is far beyond Solomon's temple, and the glory that fills that will be far beyond Solomon's temple. He gives details about the millennial kingdom, the temple, in his visions, and of course later on in Zechariah is about the return of the king. So that was part of his encouragement, and of course they built it. Verse 22. Then was Zerubbabel son of Shealtiel and Jeshua, again, Zerubbabel and Joshua, and they began to build the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And with them were the prophets of God helping them. So Haggai and Zechariah, God realizes the 2-prophet problem, so he sent 2 prophets, very different, both important. So at that time came Tattenai, governors on this side of the river, and Shether-Boznai and their companions, and they said this to them. So all of a sudden, after 16 years of the temple not being built, they're starting to build it again. And the surrounding people were like, we thought we had this problem dealt with. We had this shut down. And it was shut down. People were starting to be very discouraged. Some of the Jews were like, maybe we should go back to Persia, because, the temple's not going to get built anyway. We must go back to a more comfortable life. They're very, very discouraged. And Haggai and Zechariah had them turned around, built them up. So we have this is like this Tattenai. He's actually someone that's known in history And he was apparently the person in charge of that entire region. Zerubbabel had been put in charge of the Jerusalem, Judah area. At this point, Tattenai is kind of the governor of everything on this side of the river. And they approached them. They asked them one question: who commanded you to build this house and make up this wall? Who commanded you? Who gave you the authority? What right do you have to build this? And they said, we unto them after this manner. What are the names of the men that make this building? So, yeah, Tattenai is making a case against them, and he's going to present this case to Darius. And he said, we said to them after this manner, what are the names of the men that make this building? So you can imagine the governor comes and says, what may give you the right to start building this wall? Who's in charge? Who's building it? Who's the top people? The eyes of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease. So the matter came to Darius, and then they returned an answer by letter concerning this matter. So they got upset. They contacted Darius, this is the king after Cyrus. So Ezra gets a copy of this letter. Copy of the letter, the governor, which were on this side, sent to Darius the king. The letter they sent to him wherein was written this: unto Darius the king, all peace. So they're going to send a very detailed letter. This is a governor now. It's not necessarily a riffraff person, but it's very documented, indicating exactly the steps that were taken and the response. Be it known unto the king, verse 8, that we went in the province of Judah to the house of their great God, which is built with great stones and timbers laid on the walls. And this work goes fast on and prospers in their hands. The phrase great stones implies boulders that can't be moved other than by rolling. That's the idea. And it implies fortress building. So again, they're trying to say when they build the temple, this could be a big military fortress. And they're trying to warn King Darius. And we asked the elders and said to them, who commanded you to build this house and to make up these walls? And we asked the names also, to certify to you that we might write the names of the men that were the chief of them. So we want to get the names of the ringleaders, and we're going to include them for you, but this is what their answer was. They didn't give us the name of their ringleaders, they said this. So the rest of this is a quote from Zerubbabel concerning why they're doing this. And Tattenai is including this lengthy answer from the Jews in his letter. The answer is this: we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth. It's beautiful how God is no longer the God of Israel, the God of this region, but at this point they've grown in understanding this is the God of the universe. And build the house that was built these many years ago. We're rebuilding a house that was already there, which a great king of Israel built and set up. I'm talking about Solomon. Solomon built a great temple here, and we're building another one. And who's the ringleader? God. God's the one that told us to do it. That's who's in charge. And again, this is the answer they gave to Tattenai, who's recording it for them. They said, but after that, after Solomon built that amazing temple way back there, our fathers provoked the God of heaven unto wrath. We did wrong. This is a complete transparency. We did wrong. We messed up. And he gave our fathers under the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away into Babylon. This is our history. And in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Babylon, the same Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God. So you got to picture this right. Tattenai is giving the full detail of what they said. And he's including this because he thinks it's nonsense. These guys have this insane story as to why they have a right to build the temple. It's crazy. Talking about they had a big temple here before, or maybe they had something there, but they're riffraff. They're nothing. And then they're going to make up some story about how the great King Cyrus from way back actually told them it was okay. and like he paid for it and everything. So it's a mocking thing, saying, you wouldn't believe the story they told me. And they told me this. They said, yeah, King Cyrus, the great King Cyrus, made a decree. And the vessels of gold and silver in the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, brought in the temple of Babylon, those that Cyrus kicked out of the temple of Babylon and delivered to us, whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor. Sheshbazzar is the Babylonian name for Zerubbabel. We saw at the very beginning of the book there. And they're using this name because that's probably the name that's in the official record someplace. So if you go back and say, I don't see any Zerubbabel here. Zerubbabel is a Hebrew name, but it means born in Babylon. So apparently he adopted a Hebrew name, and that's what he's known by. If they use Zerubbabel's name in the letter here, it wouldn't mean anything to the Persian record keepers. So, but again, this is the story that the governor is telling Darius that these crazy Jews told him. He said, Governor. So yeah, all the gold, it was from this temple that they're talking about. It was taken by Nebuchadnezzar, and then King Cyrus took it out of Nebuchadnezzar's treasury and sent it back. It's an insane story. Who would believe that? He said, take these vessels, verse 15, go and carry them back in the temple that is Jerusalem. Let the house of God be built in this place. And then the same Sheshbazzar that laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, and since that time, even until now, has been building it and is not finished. So, King Darius, that's the story they gave me. You wouldn't believe it. They actually had this crazy story that you had Cyrus's approval, and then he sent back all the gold that there used to be gold here in the first place. Didn't make any sense. So therefore, end of the letter, if it seemed good to the king, let there be a search made in the king's treasure house, which is there in Babylon, whether it be so that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build the house of Jerusalem, and let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. So check out the crazy story and get back to me. Then Darius, his king, made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls, where the treasure was laid up in Babylon. And it was found in Achmetha. Achmetha is a small, out-of-the-way place, but this indicates Darius did a serious search. He went to all the libraries, went to all the Congress records, went through all the, data searches, and eventually, in this obscure place where some finances were found, in Achmetha, in the palace that is in the province of the Medes. It was over in the Mede section. Why? This is King Darius the Persian. You recall in the book of Daniel, the person that took over the city of Babylon was called Darius the Mede. And there's not a lot of historical evidence for this Darius the Mede, but that's the name that this person, because that's not Cyrus. There's the general that actually conquered the city of Babylon. There was a person that was put in charge of that city, partly because of his brilliance and expertise in getting the city. Again, the city of Babylon, not quite the same thing as the nation or the kingdom of Babylon. So this person that was put in charge of the city took upon himself a kingly name. It's kind of a Persian name. And so later on, the Darius we're dealing with here is a Darius that's the king after Cyrus, taking on a name. But it's clear in Daniel, it's called Darius the Mede. Why would you put a Mede in charge? Well, the Medes and Persians were allies. And this Mede here, I forget the guy's name, Columba or something like that, not Columbo. So a lot of skeptics have said that's not a real person, but I mean, it turns out it was just different names. So now this is Darius, the king, the successor to Cyrus, does a search. And the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus did make a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be built, and the place where they offer sacrifice, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 80 cubits. with 3 rows of great stones and a row of new timber. Let the expenses be given out of the king's house. So Darius finds the record, and he's reading the record now. He's going, oh, wow, those Jews weren't crazy after all. My predecessor actually did this. You know, it's an obscure thing. It was all the thousands of things Cyrus did was kind of lost. But wow, he really did that. He says, and King Cyrus also said in verse 5, let the gold and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took forth out of the temple which is at Jerusalem, be brought back to, brought unto Babylon, that Nebuchadnezzar brought to Babylon, be restored and brought again to the temple, which is at Jerusalem, everyone to his place, and place them in the house of God. So verse 6, now therefore, Tattenai. So King Darius says, oh, I did a full records check. And in fact, that story that the Jews told you is totally true. It really did go down like that. So now, Tattenai, this is your new marching orders. Now, therefore, Tattenai, governor beyond the river, Shethar-boznai and your companions, the Aphrishtites, which are beyond the river, be ye far from hence, from thence. What's thence? Jerusalem. Thence is where Zerubbabel are building their temple. He says, get away from there. Keep your distance. Stay away from them. Leave them alone. Let them build their temple. Let the work of this house of God alone. Leave it alone. So back off. You had a concern. I'm glad you're concerned about the region, but I found out that the previous king made this order, and we're Persians. We don't undo previous king's orders. There's not much of a constitution there, but enough for the Persians. Remember, the Babylonians, they had no such rules. They could change their mind anytime they wanted to. Remember with Daniel? Mm-hmm. It says the law is anyone praying with another god must be put on the lion's den. You couldn't undo that. Remember the book of Esther. All the Jews today, new law. You can kill them on that day. Everybody go. He couldn't change that law. What did he do to save the Jews? He armed them. It's okay. Well, on this day, everyone has a right to go kill Jews. So when he had to change his mind, he couldn't change the law, but he did. He went and armed them and gave them all sorts of military backup so they could survive that particular day. That's a different story, and it happens later than this time period, of course. But so here's the thing. This is Tattenai's new marching orders. In addition, verse 8, I make a decree that ye shall do to the elders of the Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto these men, that they not be hindered. King says, you know, the taxes that you're supposed to collect and send to me from the region of beyond the river, collect those same taxes, but send them down there to help build the temple. Mm-hmm. So not any extra money, but the same tax that's supposed to go to me. Let me know how much it's supposed to be, but you send it down there instead. And that which they have need of. Let's just think about this. For 16 years, they weren't building temple. They were discouraged. They had quit. It was done. Not going to happen. Matter of fact, Haggai says, I find it strange that you're all living in nice paneled houses and the house of God is sitting there unfinished. What's going on here? What's he saying? Well, they had bought lots and lots of cedar paneling from Lebanon on the king's credit card and had been licensed to do it. And so you can imagine for 19 years, there's been stacks and stacks of nice, fine cedar panels laying around. And Haggai kind of tongue-in-cheek says, I see lots of nice paneling in your houses. Not sure where that came from. But because when they went back to build the temple, Haggai, he sent them out into the woods, get hatchets and saws, cut down some lumber, get the temple going. So it wasn't quite the same nice cedar when it finally finished, but it was done. So expenses. Now, verse 9. And these are the things they need for the young bullocks, rams, and lambs, for burnt offerings, for the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, oil, according to the appointment of the priest, which hath the Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail. In other words, Tattenai, you and your men and the rest of the region, it's your job to provide them with all the bulls, lambs, wheat, grain, everything they need for their sacrifices. It's your job to make sure that they have a full inventory at all times. Again, the prophet said, start building. You take a step in the direction of God, and all of a sudden, all things work together for good. These people were totally disillusioned. Like, why do we come here in the first place? We came here to build a temple. It's not getting built. I was just kind of take care of my family and keep going. Make sure you do this so they can offer sacrifice of sweet savor to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. So, Tattenai, here's your job. Make sure they have everything they need for the temple. Make sure all the money that would go to me goes to them. And at the very end, make sure that when they're doing the offerings, they're praying for me, praying for the king. And by the way, you should all do that too. All of you need to be praying for the king. You know, God save the king. You're supposed to be doing that. And I've made this decree, in case you have second thoughts, Tattenai, that whosoever shall alter this word, if you don't obey what I'm saying, let timber be pulled down from his house. In other words, may his house be destroyed. You do that. And being set up, let him be hanged thereon. So if someone decides they don't want to do my decree, because I'm King Darius, destroy his house, get a pile of rubble there, put a big stick on it, and hang him there. Let his house be made a dunghill for this. And that house can never be used for anything else. It's going to be a junk, it's going to be a dump. Let it get overgrown. So if anybody thinks that I don't really want to help out those Jews, well, King Darius says you're in trouble. And the God that has caused his name to be dwell there, destroy all kings and people, as to put to their hand to alter and to destroy the house of God which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree that it be done with speed. Darius says, the God of the Jews, may that God wipe you out if you alter my decree. So if you don't think my hand is sufficient, the God that King Cyrus thought was worth following and honoring is the God that you need to watch out for. Then Tattenai, the governor of the side of the river, Shethar-boznai and the companions, according to that which Darius the king had said, they did it speedily. Is that the answer they wanted? No. That's not what they wanted at all. They wanted the king to do what the future king was going to do, Artaxerxes, later on concerning the wall of Jerusalem. So that's the picture Ezra's putting here for us. And the elders of the Jews built it, kept building. And they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah, the son of Iddo. They built it and finished it, according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. The house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, which is in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. There we go. 70 years since it was destroyed. And the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the children of captivity kept the dedication of the house of God with joy. So basically, 2 years for the foundation, 15 years or so to do nothing, and then 4 more years to finish the whole thing. And they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their courses. The courses here involve the rotation. We'll see later on that, remember, David broke up the priests into, not 70, 20, I forget the number, certain number of groups. They called them courses. Ezra had to rebuild that from scratch. He built that. And one of those courses was the course of Abijah, in which there was a line from Aaron that went through that. And we see that name showing up later in John the Baptist. His father was of that line, Abijah, which leads a lot of people, including Pastor Ben, to say that John the Baptist would have been the legitimate heir to the high priest. Of course, the high priest at that time, when Jesus was there, was the Rome appointed the high priest. It had nothing to do with legitimate high priests. So, Caiaphas and his ilk. And off at verse 17, The dedication of this house of God, 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and a sin offering for all Israel, 12 he-goats, one for each tribe. All 12 tribes were represented, according to the number of the tribes of Israel. And they set up the priests in their divisions, and the Levites in their courses for the service of God, which at Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. These people are going to follow the book. They're not going to deviate. In many ways, they learned their lesson. No more idolatry. And that was one thing that they were cured of. Idolatry never happened again in Israel's history. And the priests and Levites were purified together. All of them were pure. These are the ordination processes that had to happen. Moses ran that the first time when he set up Aaron, but they had to go through the same process. This would have involved a red heifer sacrifice, and killed the Passover for all the children of the captivity. A full-fledged Passover for the first time in 90 years. And they're just so excited they can actually do a real Passover with a real temple. There's some things missing. There's no Ark of the Covenant in this temple. It's disappeared. That didn't survive. There's different theories as to where it went. There's no Shekinah glory. There's no cloud by day or anything like that. It's going through the motions. God's honoring it because God honors faith, right? Not ritual. And it's one of the things in Zechariah that came in and says, we have these rituals we've been doing, should we keep doing it? And the answer was, are you doing it for me or for yourself? You know, God answered, that was God's question of that. And so we had the setup here, they're doing their Passover. And all the children of Israel, which were come out of captivity. Again, there's still millions of them back in Persia. They're living their lives. And of course, much later on, the story of Esther comes out of that. Captivity, and on all such as had separated themselves unto them from the filthiness of the heathen of the land. See, the Lord God of Israel did eat. What does that phrase mean? This doesn't mean how horribly subhuman the heathen were. It's an honest assessment that the Jews had some very strict cleanliness requirements. And in fact, they were just much cleaner than everybody else on a physical level. Also, the uncleanness of the heathen is all the adultery. By that, I mean idolatry. The idolatry and the adultery and the perversion and all the other things that were famous in the ancient world. And they were not going to mix with that anymore. He said, oh, you want to build a temple? No. When people build a temple are real Jews, people that worship Yahweh and Yahweh alone, no one else. And they kept themselves pure, and they ate and they fellowshiped. Verse 20, and they kept the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days. The word Sabbath always means Saturday, the seventh day, but each of the festivals had days that, depending on what day that festival landed on, that day was also called a Sabbath. So that's why the first fruits is the first day of the week after the last Sabbath. It doesn't necessarily have to be Saturday. It could be a couple days earlier. So, and of course, the first fruits is when that day, that the first day of the week after the last Sabbath was Resurrection Sunday for us. So, but they're just so happy. They honored God. The prophets came and gave them encouragement. We all need it sometimes. What's encouragement? Encouragement was when you say, I am going to jump off the high dive. And you climb up there and you go all the way up there and you look down and you go, oh my gosh, what did I just say? Well, you're the one that said you want to do this, right? It's in your heart to do it. It's in your will to do it. And now you have second thoughts, right? What's encouragement? It could be, you can do it. It could be someone giving you a little push. Encouragement. That's all we need sometimes. For the Lord had made them joyful and turned the heart of the king of Assyria unto them to strengthen their hands in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. Now, here is the big issue. What Ezra called Darius, the god of Assyria. I mean, the king of Assyria, because he correctly called him the king of Persia a few verses earlier and throughout, right? Mm. What's happening here is, from the Jews' perspective, they look at their captors as one entity. The people that are controlling them, the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians. And we see here, Ezra is just reminding them that the people that God has used to punish Israel have been the people that are put over this region. This is the region. In the north, it was the Syrians and the Babylonians. So it's not a misprint here. Some people try to say, well, maybe it's a typo or typographical error. It could be. I'm not going to, but the understanding here of the Ezra, and we see that in Jeremiah also. Sometimes he'll talk about the king of Assyria and Babylon, all in kind of one breath, covering it. The king of the oppressor. And the point here is that, is King Darius saved? No indication of that whatsoever. Cyrus, maybe a slight indication, maybe, but unlikely. The point is, can God turn the heart of our oppressor? Can God change the heart of our oppressor because we're faithful, because of our prayers? The answer is yes. We don't have to go, please God, give us a Christian president. That's not the point. In fact, we've had some Christian presidents that were pretty terrible. So that's not the point. The point is, can we be faithful to God? Can we trust God to turn all things for good? And can we put it in God's hands? It doesn't matter how wicked the president is, how stupid the president is, how unright for the job the president is. God can turn anyone's heart. And it said, he may turn the heart of the king of Assyria to them and strengthen their hands in the work of the house of their God, the God of Israel. Right. Dear Lord, thank you for this incredibly encouraging, fun, with twists and turns narrative of how you work, totally beyond how we work. Your ways are so far above our ways. So God, we pray that you would just bless these words to our hearts. Help us to, next time we're in an impossible situation, receive some encouragement from a word, from a pastor, from a friend, and allow that encouragement to let us work one more day, do one more thing, and let us just sit back and watch the salvation of the Lord. Watch as you come through. Watch as your plans are made manifest to us, because we took one tiny step of faith. So bless us as we go. Keep us healthy, keep us safe. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't now that we're building the temple.
No, they were trying to build a new one in this place.
Right.
There was
so
no plan. No, not at all. At this time, yeah. Yes, actually. Herod's temple was this temple here that he did a lot of additions to. He put a big face to add a lot of other things. We call Herod's temple the third temple, but it's really temple 2.1. It's a beefed up version. He did it, put a lot of gold on. He's not a Jewish guy. He was put in charge to appease the Jews. He spent a lot of money building his temple. And that's the temple that Jesus would have been in. That's the temple. You can think of some of the prophecies where it talks about the glory of God filling the temple. Well, when Jesus walked into Herod's temple, he was doing just that. And he walked in. Remember, when he cleaned the temple the first time, he said, "My Father's house." And that zeal, that was a sign of a Messiah, right? My Father's house. When he came in after Palm Sunday, declaring himself to be king, if you'll have me, he walks in, he cleanses the temple a second time, and in that time, he says, "This is my house." It's a distinction, because at that point, if the Jews had accepted him, he would have been the king, that would have been his house, and he knew it wouldn't happen, and that part of the reason for that was so that Gentiles could be grafted in, all of that. But he still has to go through the motions of offering himself. He had to offer himself in order to be rejected. So I always thought it was interesting that it's my house now. When he comes into Jerusalem, he comes in like a boss. He says, "This is my house. I'm the king." He shuts down the Pharisees and Sadducees. They don't have another word to say to him now. They can't talk back anymore. He just embarrasses them. So it's a great scene. But that's the temple that was built at this point. It's called Ezra's temple because it's in the book of Ezra, but it was built long before. Maybe he might have been born at this point, born at this time, maybe. So, well, Janine, good to see you.
Good to see you guys too. Thank you. Thank
Stuart,
you.
if any little thoughts you want to toss in there, Stuart, before I get my dessert?
No, I mean, this is a very, classic of how, the Jews gave up for that period of time. And they, they built the foundation and then they gave up basically. And then when they got the persecution, God was there to say, okay, we're going to put a fire under you and you get it done in 4 years.
Right.
That's kind of what it came down to, is that they lost faith.
Right. But that happens to the best of us. So
Oh yeah, all the time.
Encouraging story. So hey, well, thanks so much. Thanks,
God
Stuart.
bless you. Thank
See y'all
you.
later.
Thanks
Bye.
so much. You guys have a great night. God bless. Happy Thanksgiving.
You bet. Thanksgiving.
We'll
Thanks.
talk to you tomorrow or Monday, John.
Okay, you bet. Bye.
Okay.